Good morning. My name is Greg Van Dyke. I'll be presenting to you my presentation today on the sloth signal, a rewiring of work for meaning. I am a mid-career professional and graduate student at Biola University. For the past 15 years, I've worked primarily as a commercial construction senior project manager, building high-rise buildings and large multifamily apartment projects. I strive to be a continuous lifelong learner with a vocational compass that is calibrated by theology, management theory, and 20 years of real world workplace grit and determination. Today, I bring you a reframed problem that we too often dismiss with a sigh: sloth in the workplace. Um, and what I'm pushing to advocate for is that we should realize that sloth is not always laziness. Oftentimes, it is a signal. It is like a blinking dashboard light in your organization that warns of depleted motivation, misaligned structure, digital overstimulation and distraction, and often identity disintegration. Through my hours of research and fruitful engagement with methodology suggested by Innovators DNA and the writings of management theorist Peter Drucker, I began to think of this concept of sloth not as just laziness, but rather as an early warning signal that reveals other important causal issues such as depleted energy, fractured identity, and misaligned rhythms and energy levels. My idea is that we need to stop bribing sloth with bonuses and incentives and start listening to what this sloth or this lack of workplace engagement, workplace motivation, look at that and see what that is really telling us. I propose a disruptive framework that redesigns the modern workplace around biological rhythms, role clarity, visible meaning, and relational mentorship. Through observation, networking, and cross-industry insight, in addition to using the insights of academics such as neuroscientist Andrew Huberman of Stanford and clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson of Harvard and University of Toronto, um, in addition to my thought process that I feel is soundly rooted in theology, I've generated a basis for like a diagnostic model and scalable system that of habit and rhythm-based engagement management practices to address lack of worker engagement and diminish productivity. Um, why this matters? If we get this right, we do not just increase productivity, but we also wind up stewarding our employees towards greater purpose and engagement with their organization and an opportunity to realize their true potential as workers. As mentioned, I am a senior project manager in commercial high rise construction. As such, it should be easy to see that my work has always been focused on productivity and meeting scheduled deadlines and delivering a quality product. So, question of worker engagement and motivation and results from workers is something that's always on my mind. Um, in considering the question of sloth in the workplace, a single diagnostic question just really disrupted my assumptions and pretty previous ideas about this concept. This question is whether or not this perceived sloth is actually sinful or a lack of character, or is it rather a in fact a signal of survival or a biological response. So subsequent review of research by Texas A&M on post-lunch increases in errors and diminished productivity in the afternoon, in addition to my networking insights from my business mentor and a couple of other individuals, um, have catalyzed for me a powerful association that sloth is actually real-time feedback on productive rhythms, on daily work routines, and is often a natural response to a lack of role clarity, and is not, in fact, a moral failure of an individual. We'll get into my insights from my networking later on in the presentation. Okay. Wicked problem and target audience. So, um, one of the things I stumbled upon in my research is results from a recent Gallup poll that indicate that upwards of $1 trillion is lost annually in the United States to business firms due to lack of worker disengagement and the phenomenon known as quiet quitting, where people show up to work but they consciously make a decision to be less engaged and less productive at work. My target audience for this presentation would really be any organization that has more than 10 employees. So say the 10 employees up to 1,000, but I don't think there's a limit as to number of employees. The demographics that I'm focusing on in terms of workers would be the Gen Z cohort, people that are recently or new to the workforce, and mid-career professionals. That often mid-level employees will have a bit of experience a certain level of burnout or lack of engagement, a lack of purpose. And in a behavioral thought process, I'm seeking a low-cost, science-backed set of engagement tools for Gen Z and mid-career talent. So why does this hurt now? As mentioned from the Texas A&M study, they found a decrease in productivity of 15% or more, and they saw a drastic increase in typographical errors just looking at office work of upwards of 20% increase in errors in the afternoon. And then in engaging with my business mentor, Mark Warren, and in the interview with him, I found that the usage of annual bonuses and such incentives really has a diminishing return on investment, especially within 18 months. This is also an important question because employee retention is an important issue, as the cost of replacing an employee is often 1.5 times what you pay for them for a year. So that a year of a new employee costs 1.5 times due to the having to find headhunters and having to make the search to find new employees, screening new employees, and then onboarding and training new employees. That represents a drastic loss to companies if they're not able to maintain retention. So, in looking at discovery skills, the first one that was key, greatly helpful for me in developing my approach to this project was association skills. According to Dyer and Gregerson and Christensen in Innovators DNA, disruptive ideas often emerge when behavioral discovery skills converge in the cognitive skill of associating. And then later you have questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting, which help to supply the raw material for my associative breakthrough. And with the subsequent slides, I think I'm going to explain a little bit more detail. So looking in the questioning process, I compiled 75 diagnostic questions, or really not just diagnostic questions, but like questions to really analyze the problem and understand the problem of lack of worker engagement, lack of diminishing productivity. And these questions help to pierce the surface of my assumptions. For example, do we reward presence of employees more so than output? Is it just having a warm body there that's the important thing, or should we be looking at productivity and work rates? And then another question that helped to shape my thinking is whether or not employees are truly lazy, or maybe perhaps they're just cognitively depleted because we're not using resources appropriately. We're not being strategic about how we point the energy of our employees. There's a biblical echo to this process of questioning, as I found in my research, that I just asked the question to Google, how many questions does Jesus ask in the Bible? And most scholars agree that he asks approximately 307 questions throughout the text of the Bible. So that shows the example of how we should be open to exploring problems, questioning issues, and that in fact leads to a greater emphasis on compassion, in that we're looking to expose hidden inefficiencies, and we're trying to see what the diagnosis is rather than just focusing on condemnation and punishment. So, in using the skill of observation, you kind of have to have a perspective of an anthropologist and that type of thinking of studying about people. And so that led me to, gather observational notes and questions and organize hours of research into the existing academic literature, which revealed to me the role that confusion consistently can will precede passivity. The confusion of the individual worker is what's causing his passivity. And that also led me to the realization that energy peaks early in the before afternoon, and then you typically plunges mid-afternoon. We have a crash around, say, 3 p.m. Additionally, consideration of the example of Pixar and their storyboarding labs underscored the motivational power of having a visible narrative. So basically, this observation process, it linked my thought processes to consider biological rhythms and the impact of narrative and organizational design or strategy and scheduling. Networking. So for networking, I developed a tri-industry panel, which really amplified my perspective. I reached out to my business mentor, Biola business mentor, Mark Warren, who is a recently retired managing director of a wealth management investment fund. Um, and his insight was that disengagement is often a product of misdirected rewards, that like bonuses and those types of incentive perks don't really have a long-term sustained impact, and that really you get more measurable and more sustained and future-oriented impact through proactive mentoring and career mapping, making a narrative for the employee of what their career will be and what their path is at the company. Through my friend and attorney and successful restaurant owner manager, well, formerly he had owned restaurants, Phil Moriello, he reframed sloth as really like a systemic or institutional structural deficiency that pushes employees towards learned helplessness. Um, and then finally, with my creative representative, my friend Sean Dahlberg, he's an Emmy-winning film and video producer, director, writer, editor based in New York City. And so in his creative studio environment, he portrayed disengagement as really a result of a narrative void. So seeing the perspectives of these very different individuals, I realized their metaphors of growth, of agency, of story. And this greatly helped to sharpen my systemic diagnosis and my production of solutions towards this issue. Um, and as Drucker says, innovation surfaces where disciplines intersect, where you have different ways of thinking crashing in upon each other and resulting in something new. Okay. Now into the usage of experimenting. Experimenting really came into place more in my developing of my questions and my thought process to try and develop our diagnostic model, a set of suggestions. I used the Scamper method, of course, of substituting, combining, adapting, modifying, putting to another use, eliminating, and reversing. That helped me to develop ideas. For example, perhaps consider substituting morning meetings with more effective usage of that time for deep work blocks. So you reverse the order of having a morning meeting, instead have your meeting in the afternoon. We should also perhaps consider eliminating mid-afternoon screen time with digital devices and computers to get a break, step away from those screens. And so additionally, I'm suggesting that in follow-up of using this methodology, we incorporate A/B testing and perhaps pulse survey feedback to document the positive or negative effects of of the execution of any of my suggestions. Ultimately, my suggestions consist of extremely low price management strategies that can confront this wicked problem. Okay. So, as mentioned before, we have consideration the biological aspects of worker disengagement, circadian rhythm, dopamine cycles. This is also ties into the theology perspective of whether or not we have a thought process of the Sabbath, of having, work, expenditure of energy, and then replenishment of energy and rejuvenation, even within the work environment. And as mentioned, I use management theory and sources from Innovator's DNA and Drucker to consider my core hypothesis of sloth actually being a result of misaligned rhythm, unclear calling or role development, and an absence of narrative. And this led me towards a four-pillar solution for this issue that comes in the form of a solution architecture with the acronym RRNM. And that's R for rhythm, R for role clarity, N for narrative, and M for mentorship. In considering rhythm, we should think about the fact that we need to align our work patterns with the natural circadian energy cycles of our individual workers. We should consider structuring the days into perhaps distinct blocks, such as deep work blocks, reflection blocks, collaboration blocks, and renewal periods, without just mashing it up in chaotic order. If you're more deliberate about thinking about the best times to do those types of activities that can increase productivity and overall have a positive impact on employee morale. Such methods counteract afternoon fatigue, as we saw in the case of the Texas A&M study. Through our second R, role clarity, this and actually in theology draws from 1 Corinthians 12 and the body metaphor, that just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ and our relationship with God. And that type of Christian thinking should push us to ensure that each member of a team understands their purpose, their contribution, and their fit into the team and into the organization. And that only further pushes us to incorporate career mapping tools and mentor coaching to align individual aspiration with organizational objectives. And our third letter, N, narrative, that through my research pushes me to think that we should consider using perhaps storyboarding dashboards on a employee account website to make daily progress visible. And we could even consider connecting that to the larger organization to show when appropriate productivity of individuals. This is, of course, mixing up a little bit. Now thinking on the third letter, N, the narrative, we should consider using storyboarding dashboards to make daily progress. And this, of course, was inspired by my creative representative, Sean Dahlberg, in noting that disengagement is often due to a narrative void. This helped me to reframe. This might help us to reframe repetitive work as, in fact, mission aligned and spiritually worthwhile for our employees. And then moving on to the final letter, M, that's for mentorship. That's where we should consider replacing short-lived incentive systems like bonuses with relational investment and growth pathways. Give our workers a sense of where the story is leading to and what the ultimate goal is for the organization and also for them individually. We should also perhaps encourage small group mentoring triads, so small groups work together on figuring out what their pathways are, and this can help to develop consistent feedback loops. This all reflects the biblical models of discipleship and stewardship, so that way we can align orthopraxy with performance culture. All right. And that segues into the biblical foundations of our thought process to this issue. From Genesis 1, we see the establishment of the 6-in-1 rhythm of the work rest week, and that's declared when that was declared good. In Mark 2:27, we're reminded that Sabbath was made for mankind, and that so rest is something that's by design. It's not a defect. You shouldn't be always working and never resting, and you shouldn't be always resting and never working. There's a determined balance that we're striving towards. In First Corinthians 12, we see theological support for developing an idea of role clarity and knowing purpose within an organization and within the greater body of the organization. And this can help to prevent apathy. Just as Paul teaches us that every member of the body has a God-given role, recognizing that these roles are important is essential to preventing feelings of apathy, inferiority, or the opposite of going towards pride, of thinking that you're more important than any other given employee. So this aligns with orthopathy that dignifies workers' identity in the image of God, that God is working towards something, we should also be working towards something. And then, of course, orthopraxy, in seeing that managers emulate Christ's usage of questions and his work of stewarding the individuals that he's working with. All right. So let's see here. From Drucker, we see that Drucker, he names process need and incongruity amongst is very important among the 7 opportunity windows. Our approach targets both process need and incongruity. The unmet process need for circadian aligned scheduling, and incongruity between bonuses and sustained motivation. After all, innovation, Drucker insists, is disciplined work and not just accidental genius. There is a strategy, there's a thought process that leads to innovation. It's not just a flash of genius. Okay, and then so throughout this, my approach to analyzing this problem had to wrestle with critical and creative thinking. The critical thinking came in disciplined analysis and looking towards evidence-based judgments and valid academic literature on the subject. The creative thinking came forward in producing novel and useful ideas that lead towards possible suggestions to solve this problem. So my process in thinking about this issue puts both of these approaches together through rigorous questioning and observing, and then later suggestion of divergent experiments that we can implement. So this leads to development of possible suggestions or possible prototypes of what we can do to think about the circadian rhythm, circadian energy issue in a daily workday. We could perhaps break up the schedule so that in the morning you have a focus on deep work, and then perhaps in a lead up to lunch you would have a moment for movement or reflection. And then after lunch, that would be the better opportunity for meetings or collaboration time. Also, we could be mindful to incorporate possible usage of mobile apps that track pulse levels and energy levels and flow in real time, which could provide feedback for adaptive scheduling algorithms and capture an immediate return on investment. A second and third prototype or pilot program that we could develop would be the implementation of storyboards, development of a real mentoring lattice or structure for proactive mentoring. Digital narrative dashboards could be used to broadcast daily progress if we want to broadcast that to the rest of the team or just to a few individuals in management. or even just for the individual employee to self-police. And this could transform their what is perceived as invisible effort into real visible meaning. We could develop in the mentoring lattice small group mentoring triads that can meet biweekly. We can use career mapping dashboards to tie individual aspirations to organizational purpose. And, I'm confident that developing an early pilot program could test these suggestions and probably show marked improvement within a 30 to 90 day trial period. Um, Viability and return on investment. So implementation costs would be minimal, ranging perhaps from as low as no dollar cost perceivable to perhaps up to $150 per employee, which would probably be primarily cost related to any additional software licenses we use for monitoring or for storyboard dashboarding. And we could consider using some funding for perhaps for facilitator training. Though fortunately, this is not really rocket science, so I'm not envisioning any rigorous training of our managers. This is more about identifying useful management and planning techniques and engagement in a mentoring, proactive mentoring of our employees for career mapping. Um, I would predict that there would be substantial return on investment in terms of dollars and productivity through greater employee retention, improved productivity, and innovation premium encouragement of new ideas. So, I mean, ultimately, I would argue that employee stewardship actually equals competitive advantage. Leading our employees well and being servant leaders and mindful of stewardship of our employees creates strong return on investment. In terms of a roadmap, I could see that immediately we could develop a quick 90-day or 30-day pilot program, and then that could be followed at the end of the year through evaluation and refining of metrics and figuring out what our key performance indicators would be. In 2026, we could have a toolkit rollout, perhaps leadership theology workshops, um, to have a more of a conscious thought process of methodology of what items work or don't work. And then we could also later in 2027 consider external certification processes and training if that we think that's necessary, and perhaps use an SaaS platform for monitoring performance indicators. All right, and then in thinking about risks and mitigating risk, I would think that prevention of change fatigue is addressed through our phased adoption and our championing of networks and proper feedback systems. We may have to be careful in how we frame the theological roots of the solution. We could consider using more secular language, such as the importance of clear division of labor for the parts of the body metaphor, and an explanation of circadian rhythms and rest rejuvenation cycles, rather than the direct usage of Sabbath language. Um, I think that data overload will be tempered by automated analytics and focusing on limited number of key performance indicators such as work productivity, impact, um, analysis of how long work meetings are and what the impact is of work meeting length. And we could also use anonymous surveys of employees to get their feedback in real time. Um, I think that legal exposure will be minimal as these suggestions are more focused on strategic planning and helping our employees to reach their maximum potential while also having more enjoyment of their work and understanding their work and the purpose of their work. Um, so, uh, Here's the list of slides as we get to a conclusion for the project. These are, of course, my thought process was grounded in the innovator's DNA and Drucker's discipline of innovation. Also referred to neurobiology studies from Andrew Huberman and some various articles indicating phenomenon such as quiet quitting and workplace levels of peak productivity at certain points in the day. Um, Ultimately, in conclusion, I want you to think about this sloth signal as a signal that reframes disengagement as an important diagnostic feedback. I invite you, as possible investors or executives, culture builders in my audience, to consider implementing these mindful management suggestions to improve employee engagement and increase productivity with a more human centered, rhythm centered model. Together, we can work to convert situational workplace apathy into converting it and transforming those attitudes towards more purposeful momentum and ultimately steward people toward greater flourishing at work.